1. I'm never sure how to start off talking about personal experiences, so I'll try to keep this relatively easy to follow. All children believe and fear ghosts, obviously. The boogeyman, Bloody Mary, it's a never-ending cycle. I stopped believing when I was somewhere around 10, and I remain skeptic to this day. However, the last few years have been rather questionable regarding my beliefs. Everything kicked off when I was about 15 years old, and I started exploring witchcraft, something that ran in my mother's side of the family. Past life exploration, Ouija boards, etc. I wasn't so much a believer, rather just fascinated with the idea as an aspiring writer at the time. I started suffering from vivid, unexplainable auditory and visual hallucinations, or so I believe them to be. Despite many tests, I've never gotten a diagnosis, neither physically or mentally, that remotely correlates to the things I've seen. It started off with a woman in my room. Sometimes she'd be standing at the crack in my door. Other times I'd wake up to her crouched by my bed. Nearly nose to nose. She wasn't very clear, almost fuzzy around the edges like a blurred photo. And didn't really linger. Most of the time I'd blink or double take and she was gone. Soon enough it escalated to seeing these things almost everywhere. But mostly in dark areas or in the evening when it began to get dark. They never moved from their spots, always perfectly still. For a good year or so I was petrified. I theorized brain tumors, too many scary movies, and overactive imagination, up until I moved in with a roommate with my twin brother another year later. The vibes in that house were atrocious. There was so much negativity. You'd come home from work to relax and end up feeling heavier than you did during your 9 to 5. One night I went to get a snack on my night off, and it was dead quiet in the house. I remember how specifically I ensured I closed cupboards carefully, out of respect for those sleeping upstairs. When I finally saw my first hallucination that moved. I had been leaning against the fridge, fumbling with some dumb gummy wrapper, when in the corner of my vision, a pitch-dark creature that looked like skin pulled taut over bone crawled at inhuman speed across the kitchen wall. I was definitely startled, having been so used to motionless figures, now seeing one move across the wall toward me, that I just threw the wrapper in the bin and speed-walked to my brother's room. We came down about 10 minutes later to cupboard doors wide open. Granted, 10 minutes is long enough for someone to slip downstairs for a snack, so I had no idea whether or not it was something to be worried about. I guess expressing what I'd seen to my brother was soon expressed to our roommate without my knowledge, and one day he confronted me, questioning whether or not I was some sort of ghost whisperer, or whatever it's called. Not being a believer in these things, I dismissed this theory and went on with my life. The crawling figure became rather consistent for a large portion of the time I lived there. My roommate used to joke that I had a friend, that it was attached to me, and despite my lack of belief, the idea still made me nervous. There were some nights I would stare at it for hours while it resided mostly in corners or ceilings. And there was an ongoing thought that told me if I took my eyes off it, it would get closer. I was still skeptic, but the thought was unsettling enough to keep me from averting my gaze. Some nights I would pass out maintaining eye contact with it, ensuring it never got too close until I was asleep. Mind you, at this point, I was 19 years old, so overactive imagination was ruled out. Eventually I moved out, and when I did, it felt like 100 pounds had lifted off my shoulders. The energy had changed completely once I left. I haven't seen that one since, though I do still struggle with seeing hallucinations and figures randomly throughout my week. At this point, after EKGs, MRIs, X-rays, and multiple mental wellness tests, and not one single thing at all related to hallucinations, auditory or visual, I'm completely stumped. I'm not sure what to think of my experiences, whether they're paranormal or just mind games. Has anyone else had similar experiences or advice in the matter? I've never tried communicating or interacting with these figures, not sure if trying would benefit me or make things worse. Never had them as a child, only when I began studying witchcraft history on my mother's side. I've had more experiences than the two listed. These, however, are just a few of the most prominent. I still have them to this day, though not as active as they used to be. 2. This happened like 13 years ago when I was 16 or 17. I used to hang out with my summer apartment neighbors. We were all coming from different places to that town on summer, and neighbor to neighbor, we ended up being a lot of people. Well, it turns out that my neighbor was some kind of experienced user with the Ouija board. And with all the stories he told us, we decided to give it a try. Then one night, we went to a park near the station with the board we made, a piece of wood material that we painted with the alphabet, yes and no, hello, bye, and 0 to 9. It was very symmetric, and we were so proud of it. At first we were 5, and we slightly put our fingers on the glass situated at the center of the board. Then Nacho, my friend, said, "Now to get stronger, make circles around the center of the board." And it gradually was getting more speed and accurate. He said, "Now, be sure nobody moves the glass. We'll take our finger out and put it on again one by one, while it continues making circles." And the glass continued making perfect circles at an outstanding and stable speed and accuracy. Now go to the edge of the board and leave half the glass outside of the board, and do the same at the opposite edge. I think this was totally unnecessary, but it was perfectly done, the several times that it did it. Then we started to talk with it. I remember a few things and disordered talk meanwhile we were there. More friends were arriving, and we ended up being 15 to 20 people all around the board, but just 5 of us with our fingers on the planchette. It said his name was Victor, and he died of tuberculosis in 1800 and something. Someone asked him what his favorite football team was. It said Nestic A1, and someone said that Nestic, a football team from Tarragona, was being promoted at First Division recently. Someone asked where it shit, and it said in your face. All of us started to laugh, a little frightened, and while we laughed it said, JJJ, a usual way to write a laugh back in those days, and that scared us way more. We asked if he wanted to smoke, because we were smoking weed and drinking. It said yes. Then Nacho lifted up the little glass and left a puff inside it. I remember too that Nacho asked at the beginning of the session if it didn't want any of us who were there to put our fingers on it, and the glass pointed toward a girl who was very skeptical and joking about everything. She withdrew her finger. Everything went smooth and cool until it said go, quick. We asked why, and it just repeated that. We asked if it can say bye. It said bye. We left the place, and in 5 minutes it started to rain. I don't know if it was concerned about us getting wet or if it was another thing. We tried to make another session the next day, but without Nacho, it didn't work. I'm sure this was because of Nacho's absence. 3. When I was in high school, I can't remember the exact age, but probably 15 or 16 years old, and living in my family house. There were a couple of months where I started thinking my house could be infested. This was very strange, as I've lived there basically my whole life, with the only exception of exchange semesters in uni, and never felt this way before. I mean, I was always a very creative and therefore imaginative child, and would often have nightmares until a certain age. I would wake up really late every night and go in my parents' bedroom to climb in bed with them because of this. Not sure if this is really relevant, but I was always big on dreams and the subconscious. Lucid dreaming since I was like 4 or even before. Sleep paralysis, etc., etc. Some of these nightmares were also pretty vivid and recurrent, and I remember them to this day. To give you a better picture, mine is a 3-story terraced house plus a very shabby, dusty little attic. In the lowest level, we have the basement and the garage. It's not your typical scary American basement. I'm referring to the representations usually seen in Hollywood movies here. I live in Italy. It's actually just half underground, and we have a little living room there, plus some stuff we store. Then on the ground level there's the kitchen, the living room, and a bathroom, and finally, on the first floor we have the bedrooms and another bathroom. Also, even though it is a terraced house, Ours shares only the side, directly opposite to my room, with the neighbor's house. Now, I've always been a pretty nocturnal person. I hate waking up early and love to go to bed late. I'm just wired that way. Even in high school, where I would have to wake up at 7, I'd still end up sleeping really late, even at 3 or 4 a.m. That's when I started hearing noises. It was always late at night, past midnight, especially around 2 or 3 a.m. There were very specific stomping noises coming from the stairs, like someone was running up and down them for long times on end. First night I was surprised, but not quite scared, since I reasoned it must be the neighbors running on the stairs for some reason. Our stairs are on the same side theirs are, only separated by a wall. Even though this went on for a pretty long time. From the third night, I started thinking about it more and more, and also remembered that my neighbors were a couple of elderly people in their 60s or 70s, and were not that active. That's when I got scared. I still tried to sleep and asked my family the next morning what they thought about those noises. No one heard them. My mom and brother are heavy sleepers, but me and my father are pretty light sleepers. Plus, my parents' bedroom is directly connected to the stairs, while my room is at the end of the corridor, on the opposite side. If I heard them, sure as hell my dad would hear them too. That made no sense. I started thinking I was going mad. This went on for weeks, to the point that one night I asked my dad to switch rooms because I didn't want to sleep in mine. He agreed, and the next morning he told me this time he heard them too. I remember when he told me I started crying, because then I knew I wasn't crazy or anything. But I still wasn't calm about it, of course. We started making theories over theories, but all of them were disproven by the passing of time. Until one point, the noises abruptly stopped. Never heard them again. Never investigated or even thought of getting out of bed to check the stairs or something. I was scared to death. I'm now in my early 20s. It's been years, but I still remember this, and the faces people made when I told them what was happening, in search of more logical explanations. Still got none. 4. I'm 18 now, but from ages 3 to 11, my family and I lived in a large 4-bedroom Victorian home. It wasn't really the location you would expect a haunted house to be in. We were right next to a busy street and a row of other houses, all very old though. The house had 3 floors, as the attic had been converted into 2 bedrooms, and a large walk-in storage cupboard that separated the 2 rooms. I lived with my 3 older half-siblings, and so it was very common for us to swap rooms every few months. I slept in every room, my parents' room quite often, as I was terrified every night. More on that later. The large room opposite theirs, and the 2 attic rooms. Each one seemed to have its own different type of horrors. For the first few years, I was too terrified to sleep on my own as a kid. I barely slept, and when I did, I suffered from terrible nightmares. So I would sleep in a camp bed in their room. That was where I had my first encounter with sleep paralysis. I couldn't have been older than 6, but I still remember it vividly. A small boy with a paper bag over his head seemed to emerge seemingly from the wall next to my mother's side of the bed, and slowly but surely was walking around their bed towards me. I remember looking to my side, and there was what I can only describe as a tall black stick figure, like one of those drawings who was looking above me. I couldn't move. I was sweating profusely, but I knew I was awake. The next thing I knew, he was crouching down to me, and the boy had reached the foot of my bed. It was at that moment I managed to let out a scream. I've never had anything as vivid as that again, but I'll never forget it. When I was 7 or 8, I started wanting to have my own room. I did a lot of reading to distract myself from the fear, and would often stay up till the early hours reading, too terrified to sleep. Waking up in the morning with my books still in my arms. I was given one of the attic rooms. By that point, my older sister had the room opposite mine, but she had gone off to university, and so I was alone up there. I would never dare sleep without the light on. And to be honest, old habits never die. Even now I still sleep with a light unless I'm with my boyfriend. Most nights would be me reading as long as I could, until I just had to close my eyes. It was then the voices would start up. Like there was a couple arguing in the hall. On some of the worst nights, I swear I could hear breathing coming from under my bed. It came to a point where I was so scared I had to have my dog and cat sleep in my room with me, but they couldn't settle. My dog would just keep crying, and my cat was constantly spooked. They hated being in there, so I had no choice but to remain alone. The night terrors continued. I'd wake up and just couldn't stand to be in the room anymore, so I'd creep down to the second floor and sleep outside my parents' door. I don't know how I even functioned with so little sleep. Most times I couldn't have sleepovers, as my friends would complain of being scared and hearing things. My siblings had similar experiences. When my sister had her friend over, often her friend would recount waking up in the night, and my sister was sitting up in bed, still asleep, but talking to the dark corner. My brother would have his covers pulled off him in the night, and my other sister recalled her toes being pinched while sleeping. Everyone had their own experiences in that house, even non-believers. My dad recounted being locked out from the outside of the house when he went out to the garden, even though he was the only one home, seeing a dark shadow glide next to the door as he struggled to open it. Times I would be sitting outside my parents' room at 3 a.m, and I would hear the cutlery drawer downstairs being shaken, the TV being turned on for a split second and then off, even though everyone was asleep. I couldn't do anything in that house without the feeling I was being watched. If I was alone in the house, I'd stay out in the garden the whole time. Even then, I felt extremely uneasy. I would sit on my trampoline and feel like a pair of eyes were watching me from the living room window that looked out into the garden. Our elderly neighbor told my father the backstory of the house, when my dad would sometimes recount the strange occurrences going on in the house. He told us, years before we moved in, there lived a very reclusive middle-aged woman known to be very cold and unwelcoming. She didn't leave often, only to go to work as a gym teacher. She was known to be sadistic and cruel to the children she taught. He mentioned something extremely chilling, though, which was that she had confided in him once that she lived in fear of the house. She refused to go in the attic as it terrified her. She died several years before we moved. One of the most chilling things was that once she passed, the house was completely renovated, the attics turned into rooms as I mentioned. The flower beds Mrs. Evans had so much pride in torn up, everything changed. The work was mostly done by one man, who had been hired to do so by the local council, who inherited the house as Mrs. Evans had no family to speak of. Just days after he'd finished up the renovation, his daughter died in a freak lightning accident. I personally have no idea if it is tied. It is terribly unfortunate either way. But the neighbors seemed to think that whatever was in that house certainly did not take kindly to it being changed, and decided to take revenge. That is just hearsay, mind you, but it's chilling nonetheless. I do believe there were several entities in that house, including possibly Mrs. Evans herself, but the strongest residing in the attic. I felt things up there that I have still never encountered again. A genuine feeling of something evil, something that wants to hurt you. I can't even recall how many times people were seemingly pushed when going down the stairs from the attic, or whenever my cat, who was usually the most lovely boy, was near those stairs, he would viciously attack you, with no explanation for his outburst. The whole house had its moments. It was in a constant state of darkness and bitter cold, but the attic... I don't even have the words to describe what that was. We finally moved when I was 11, and as if by magic, the nightmare stopped. I could finally sleep easy. We've moved several times since then, and I've never encountered a house like that before. Honestly, I haven't had any paranormal experiences I can think of since being in that house. But that's fine with me. It was enough for a lifetime. I do think it will always be with me, though. Sometimes I'll have the most vivid dreams that I'm back there. and I'm so glad to be there, almost as if it's calling me back. 5. So back in 2019, me and some friends decided to meet at my place for a smoke session, drink a little, and spend time together. Later in the night, we decided to go cemetery hopping. Taking my car, we looked for a cheap scare and something to tell stories about later. First cemetery we go to I'm familiar with, as it was my first pick. We go out there, see some shadow figures, and I feel the sensation of it's time to leave. I tell my friends, and if they didn't listen to me, it was the sounds in the woods and faint screaming and such that did it. I've dealt with it before out there and understand that whatever's out there, it was giving me a final warning, so we leave. As we leave, one of our friends says, "Let's go to Locust Grove." I don't know anything about this place initially, nobody does except him. After hearing his tales of towering shadows and supposed demonic figures, I take the bait and drive back towards civilization. As we're going back into town, said friend insists we bring a Bible for added protection. So we stop by the house, grab one of my old Bibles, and head back into the wilderness for Locust Grove. As I get farther and farther into the countryside, I get the unnerving feeling I'm being watched. I shrug it off and blame the night and intoxication from before. Though minimal, I'm still aware it has an effect and keep driving. Once we reach the turn for Locust Grove Road, I turn and the negative feelings intensify. I think nothing of it until one says that they see a large demon in the trees, and I catch a shadow on a set of 3-story-tall oil drums, looking at us pass in my Camry. I'm on high alert at this point. I don't want to leave my car at all costs. We finally pull up to the cemetery, a 2-acre plot of land with scattered, weathered headstones, a storage building to the left of the entrance, and a carport to the other side with a bench, burn barrel, and a stack of bricks under and around it. I park the car closer to the carport, shutting it off as I exit the vehicle with my company in tow. The temperature drops as I enter the outside. My buddies go into the graveyard. I'm already uneasy, and it's soon intensified yet again, when the same friend says, "There's a little girl that hangs around there, just so you know. She may start crying." Brilliant! I'm 10 feet from her spot then. I'm nervous, so I watch my surroundings as well as my friends, who are chattering about the shadows they're seeing, and a sudden temperature drop. I'm taking photos around me, focusing on the bench. Suddenly, they get scared out of their skin by something while I wasn't paying attention. My focus falls back to my friends, watching carefully. Then dread sinks in. I hear crying near me, too high-pitched to be masculine, and too distinct to be anything but human. I take 2 more pictures of the bench, hoping to catch something. Then the crying stops. I look to my friends, who are already on return. I'm petrified as is, and suddenly, bam! I hear something hit the burn barrel and see a faint white shadow running away. We scramble back to the safety of my car and start home. As we reach the house, we begin exchanging experiences, what we saw and what affected us. I noticed the shadow by the oil drums was gone, leaving the road, and we were all shaking. Our beloved friend who suggested the spot talked about something calling him deeper into the woods, and heard the bang, snapping him from the trance. Our other friend had a scratch on his leg for no reason and saw exactly what the others saw, and heard the same bang. I mentioned the crying, and I took photos, and in one photo I caught the little girl mentioned earlier, head turned at an almost perfect 90-degree angle, staring back at me, and she looks anything but pleased to know of my presence. Afterwards, we call it a night and go about our day normally the day after. Later on, I started asking around about the area because I wanted to know why there was so much negative energy in this area. Come to find out, this was at one point a graveyard just for slaves, which makes sense because I know an old plantation house sat about 5 miles away from the cemetery as the crow flies, And there's an abandoned slave house in the next county over, and almost all the land around here is farmers' fields. Since this issue, I forever labeled the area as the Forbidden Zone, because I don't know exactly what all is there, but from the little I've seen, it's given me more than enough reason to avoid it. After all, this is also my first incident where I've seen a spirit get physical with someone I care for. Until I know more, I don't think I want to go out there for a while. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 238. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like, comment, and subscribe. And share the video with all your friends and family, living and dead. Why not? Let's not discriminate, eh? Just because they don't have a body, it doesn't mean they can't use Wi-Fi. Right, where are we? Friday. Yes, Friday's 6th. Aha! Ha 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 ha! Yes, I have a birthday shout-out to do. I knew there was something. My brain was going,
there's something you've got to do, Mr. Freezer. It would be ever so bad if you forgot, Mr. Freezer. Go on now.
Okay, here we are. Get back here. There we go. Okay. Birthday shout-out goes to... Did they say I could use their name? Sid Noodles. They are 19 years old today. Happy birthday to you, Sid. And as has become traditional... My heavens, I'm melting. As has become traditional... Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Sid Noodles. Happy birthday to you. There we go. All right, then. I'm going to head off for now and melt for a bit, and then, while cooling on, I'll cool off with the fan instead of melting. That's probably a better thing. Then I'm going to record another video. Will I make it through to the end? Who knows? Anyway, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.